Good morning, everyone. Another video from Steve Adventure. This time we're going to be looking at the difference between steel as far as cutting performance and edge grind. Now, jumping right into it, I would say to you that steel has very little to do with the cutting capabilities of a knife, except when it comes to edge retention and toughness. Now, of course, there'll be a broad debate as far as what is the best steel, HRCs or Rockwell hardnesses and those kinds of things. But just glossing over those quickly, clearly steels are going to have better edge retention insofar as their molecular construction. So the fine grain of the edge, if it has more carbide formers to create the crystalline structure, then it's more likely to have that cutting capability. When it comes to HRC, it's very much like if you have store-bought bread versus homemade bread. I don't know about you guys, but what I like to do with homemade bread is I'm going to toast homemade bread more because it has simpler ingredients, and those ingredients respond well to heat. And that extra crispy homemade bread has a better flavor when it's toasted to a higher temperature. Or an inexpensive steel may not be as good with a high Rockwell hardness as a more expensive steel. A premium steel is more likely to respond to a high Rockwell hardness because of its composition. And so that's where people get confused. If I were to temper 1055, which this one's at, they say 57 to 59 HRC, to the same HRC that CPM3V is capable of, I would have problems with this knife because the 1055 is not good, it's not tasty at that higher toasted level. And so the HRC is not complicated. It's really what is the steel capable of and what is the best HRC for that particular steel. In any case, we're looking more at edge grind. And so when we look at cutting capability, we're going to use this piece of maple that was ethically harvested from a blowdown. And as you see, it's been peeled so that it'll dry well, and it's been drying for about 4 years. And then we look at an edge like this one, which is going to be difficult to see, except that this is on a thrower. This is a very acute edge. And when we start cutting with it, we're going to see that although it is very sharp, it doesn't make nice feathers. It tends to want to, you really have to push it into the wood, because the edge is quite steep. Or, excuse me, I guess it's more likely to be shallow. It's a steep edge, but a shallow grind. Now, if we switch over, this is that traditional, what one might say is a secondary bevel, or in the vernacular of the DBK boys, Dutch bushcraft knives, the crappy V edge. Now, if we look at a knife that's been scandied out, so I took the secondary bevel and pulled it all the way to the edge of the knife, you'll see here, it's very, very shallow grind, very steep edge. We can see when I'm cutting with it that it really wants to peel fine curls off. Let's get rid of that material. And you can see it's very easy. I'm not pushing hard at the back of the knife. It really wants to bite into the wood very easily. Now 1055 is not going to have the same edge retention that the CPM3V does because it can't be as hard, but more than that, the composition of the material is not as durable. So the more durable the material is, the thinner you can grind it to create these crazy edges. So for instance, my straight razor is much better steel than this edge is, and therefore has the edge retention to be able to be ground much thinner. Now we'll see the difference. This is a Scandi grind insofar as it's one bevel from this position all the way to the edge. This one here is a convex, so it's one bevel from here to the edge, except that it tapers or rotates in towards the cutting edge, which you can sort of see right there. What I like better about the Scandi grind, well, two things. CPM3V is very much harder to manipulate than the 1055. So making the 1055, this was really an experimental edge. on a less expensive steel on a knife that's about $50 in Canada or about $20 in the US. So I didn't feel bad about making the experiment. The CPM 3V is much harder to work with, but it holds an edge exponentially longer than the cheaper steel. And so this one here, it was I stopped short of going with a true Scandi for a couple of reasons. One, this edge is very thick. The stock is much thicker. The edge is much thicker. The grind starts down low, and a convex edge is stronger. People will say, well, what's stronger, a pyramid or an egg? Now, we know that pyramids are very strong. We base all of our building techniques, car jacks, anything that needs to be powerful, generally has a conical structure. But when it comes to fragility and strength, there's not a much better example than the dome shape of an egg. We know that if you hit the egg, it's a very thin material, it breaks very easily, but it will sustain a lot of pressure. And so I went with the egg-shaped edge on my more survival modded knife, so that it would have that extra survivability when I'm chopping, hacking, or striking things. This one will not have the survivability because it's so thin for such a deep period of time that if I were to hit a nail, for instance, this was really going to drive the edge back with a lot of damage. But we'll still see that this edge is still going to cut very fine curls in this super hard maple. This stuff is really hardened up. But you can cut very fine curls with the same edge. Excuse me, with the different edge. What's nice about this edge is the extra survivability that I've retained, and also the material is much harder, but also has better toughness. So if you look at Cedric and Ada's, he does a great job, Cedric does, of having his charts for cut tests. So this one, I believe the 1055 in his test makes about 80 cuts, where the CPM 3V makes in the range of 400. So exponentially stronger. The third grind we'll look at quickly is something with a hollow grind. This I've kept the crappy secondary V edge just because I liked it, but we can see here a hollow grind is again a different animal. So it's roughly the same thickness from the edge back quite deep in the blade, which makes it very slicey. And of course, when we use this steel, even with the secondary V edge, we can again peel some really nice curls. It just does a really nice job. Now this edge, again, won't have the survivability because it's not backed up by a lot of material. So insofar as survivability, the thrower edge is absolutely going to be the one. Lots of meat, shallow grind, and lots of meat behind it. Next in survivability, in my opinion, subject to error as it may be, would be the convex grind. So that egg shape, that dome pyramid, followed immediately by the pyramid shape of the Scandi, which has a great cutting capability. And then finally, something in this nature with the hollow grind. You're going to see lots of people complain about cold steel knives in a survival situation because they're batoning a hollow grind. Come on, really? You're going to drive all this thin little material, all this thin, and then just at the point where it starts to get strong, it's going to bind up like crazy? You wouldn't split it with a straight razor, hollow grind. And so I hope that helps to clear up some of the mythos and craziness about what sort of edges and whether or not a steel is a good cutter as opposed to an edge grind. This is not an expensive knife, but it will absolutely outperform my buddy's got a Lion steel in its factory condition, because the Lion steel has almost a thrower grind to protect the edge, and it's just not a great cutter out of the box. But if you mod the edge, it'll work. And this hopefully will also answer all of the questions that we got through private messages from our previous videos as to why almost all of the knives we showed were modified edge grinds. I was just looking for that extra slicey power. Thanks so much for your time and for your views. We really actually respect that you guys could have other things to do, but you've spent some time with us. And I hope you have a great day. Stay sharp.